Good afternoon, Spartans. Happy Thursday, December 14th. Excuse me. You can see the agenda for today. We have a check-in again, weekly check-ins, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 12. Check that 140 to 225. If you can't make the thrice a week Zoom to check in, you can send me an email. Today, we're talking about causes of mass incarceration during the 20th century, so the 1900s. And then you got some discussion questions on the second half of the documentary 13th. Be reminded that video and video guide is due, so make sure you submit that document so it doesn't get counted as late. But get that in, that is due, that should already be in, but that is due today, right now, more or less at the start of class. Let's get to it. Let's talk about the causes of mass incarceration during the 20th century, right? We've already talked about the prison industrial complex and in a general view, what any sort of industrial complex looks like, regardless of the industry. We've talked about the significant number of Americans who are incarcerated, how there is a disparate or an unequal impact between who goes to jail based on ethnicity. And we've talked about how, the falling rates in most violent crime categories doesn't necessarily match up with the significant prison population that we currently have. And you can see that the reduction in crime from the 1990s all the way to today doesn't necessarily match up with the increase, not necessarily, it doesn't match up with the increase in prison population that occurred in the 1990s up to more or less the first decade of the 21st century. So let's look at why so many people are incarcerated. There's no question that the documentary points a lot of this to prejudice and racism. Some would argue that it's systemic racism. And again, from the end of the Civil War up until probably the 1970s, there's no question about that. There was some prejudicially driven initiatives to go after certain groups of people, but that isn't necessarily the cause today. We're going to look at the causes today of our mass incarceration. We'll look at that tomorrow. But there's more to this picture. We can't just simply label it as a prejudice and racism thing, because that's not the entire story. If you're thinking about the documentary and they talked about messaging that the American public was exposed to during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We had things like the war on crime, the war on drugs. Americans were bombarded in their newspapers, news programs, radio broadcasts, literally all media, that the United States, excuse me, has a huge problem. At first, it was a huge problem on crime, or a huge problem with crime, right? We had that baby boom generation of 80 million Americans in a 20-year period being born, all growing up at the same time. We had a war on drugs, right? Starting in the 1970s through the 1990s, we had a huge drug problem. We still have a drug problem today. It's not crack and cocaine. Now it's fentanyl and opioids. Still have a huge drug problem today. Americans were influenced to believe that we have these huge problems, and how are we going to solve it? Well, the natural, the easiest choice, the most fiscally wise choice to make was to lock these people up, right? It is reflective of our society. You're a child, you break the rules, you're grounded. You're a child, you break the rules, you're sent to a timeout. You're a child, you break the rules, you're sent to your room. Some of you are even spanked, right? Like, this is how our society works. You break the rules, there's a consequence. And I'm not saying that these people who broke the rules shouldn't have a consequence. I'm not saying that whatsoever. I think we've all had me in class. You know that I'm a rules person. This is the rules. These are the rules we live by. These are the rules that I'm supposed to enforce. Everyone is subject to the same rules. But we're talking about mass incarceration. We're trying to answer why our prison population is increasing. No one's justifying criminals not facing their consequence. Why is it that we have so many people locked up? Well, these campaigns, whether they came from the media or from politicians, they created this picture that there is a problem in the United States, which there was, and that these are bad people. These are criminals. We have this mindset, and many of us still have this mindset, that people who are deviant are bad people. From our own experiences, we know this. If our behavior is not acceptable, that needs to change or there's a consequence. Some of our parents, might have even expressed that we're bad children, that we're a bad boy or a bad girl. And it's not okay. All of these things kind of play into how we have so many people locked up. The easiest solution to deviant behavior is to take away people's freedoms. In our mindset, in our culture, it is a logical thing. You break the rules, there is a consequence. Every society functions this way. But again, it doesn't stop the behavior from happening. It is not 100% effective in stopping the behavior from happening. And that's kind of what we're looking at, is how do you, one, there is no way to stop the behavior from happening altogether. There's no, again, I've said it multiple times in multiple videos. There is no 100% foolproof method to stop deviant behavior, to stop crime. Doesn't happen. Consequence, though, clearly does not. As I've said before, punishment comes after the crime. So it can't stop crime from happening if the punishment comes after the crime being committed. We know that punishment doesn't stop crime, because here you got 3 strikes, you're out. You got people doing it multiple times. You've got people who've committed a crime, got punished, committed a crime again, got punished, and here they go. Here's their 3rd time. We clearly know that punishment doesn't stop crime from happening. Doesn't matter how harsh the consequence is. If you want to reduce crime rates, you're going to have to start looking at different methods of redirection, different methods of rehabilitation. Again, no one's saying that criminals shouldn't be punished. But if we're just going to continue punishing criminals without any sort of rehabilitation, any sort of prevention, any sort of redirection, we're going to continue on with this problem where we've got a lot of people locked up. And if we're locking up groups of people, then we're going to see other groups of people continuing to benefit from it. One of the major components of the industrial complex conversation, whether it's prison or education or pharmaceuticals or whatever, there's a reason why we're made to believe that there's only one solution to a problem. And in this particular problem, it's incarceration. Why is that the solution? Because politicians benefit from it and companies benefit from it. I showed you the list of all the companies that benefit from mass incarceration. Here they are. It is just a long list of companies that are making profit off of people breaking the rules. Reducing crime is going to take a multifaceted approach. And if people are truly interested in preventing crime, then it is going to cost a significant amount of money. And it's going to mean that Americans could pay more taxes, that American companies could lose some profits. It could create other American companies from being able to gain profits, but it's going to take a lot. Punishment isn't going to solve the crime problem in this country. It's not going to solve the drug problem in this country. Again, we've got the statistics that show that punishment is not. But because of that relationship between government and corporations, it's a hard thing to do, not to mention the rewiring of our brains and how we deal with deviant behavior. These are bad people, right? They're criminals. How do you help criminals? Why should we pay money to help criminals? Well, either you do or you don't. But if the question is preventing crime, then we got to rethink some things. So for the 20th century, right, for a time, definitely some prejudice. We get to the later part of the 20th century, we got these campaigns, war on crime, war on drugs. This is what led to a huge increase in our prison population. And then we started making harsher penalties, longer sentences, right? Kept people in jail longer. And we just kept finding more and more and more people that were breaking the laws, because we were told that there are these problems and these people need to go away, clean up the streets, make things safer. Logical, no question. But it hasn't answered the problem. It hasn't answered the question. We still have a crime problem in this country to an extent. Not as bad as before, but it's still there. We still have a drug problem, different drugs in the 21st century. So if we're going to look at this, if we're going to try to solve this question, We're gonna have to rethink some things, and we'll start talking about that tomorrow. You've got a couple of discussion questions to answer here in the online chat. 3 questions. 1, what was the government's solution to combat increasing crime rates in the 20th century? How did the government try to stop crime? What was their answer to that? 2, 13th talked about imagery and messaging in campaigns and on newscasts as one of the causes of America's mass incarceration. Again, think about the war on crime, the war on drugs. Is the messaging and imagery in American campaigns and on newscasts the same or different today? So has anything changed? Or are we recycling more or less the same ideas with different particulars? Same ideas with different particulars today? Or has it changed completely? And the number 13, number 3, 13th heavily criticized the American judicial system for its complacency and systemic racism and prejudice and the government's solutions to combat crime rates during the 20th century. But what did the video fail to answer or explain in regards to the criminal and or deviant behavior problem? I'm not a person that likes people who just simply complain about something. The video certainly complained. It pointed out a criticism of our governmental institutions. But what did the documentary not offer? What did they not bring to the table for Americans to think about? All they said is, here is an unfair, unjust situation. What did they not share? What did they not give us in regards to that potential problem? So you've got these 3 questions. Again, make sure it's done by tomorrow. I'll run through these questions and then we'll look at causes for mass incarceration in this century, in this time period. We'll start looking at that for the next few days. All right. Be well, be safe. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Go Spartans.